What if the European Union never existed? Imagine this. It's 1945. World War II has just ended, leaving Europe in ruins. Cities have been reduced to rubble, economies are shattered, and millions are displaced. Nations across the continent are grappling with one burning question: how can we ensure this never happens again? Fast forward a few decades, and the European Union has become a beacon of unity, fostering peace, economic cooperation, and shared prosperity. But what if it never existed? What if instead of finding common ground, Europe remained fragmented? In this thought experiment, we'll dive into the immediate aftermath of a world without the EU, explore the short-term and long-term consequences, and speculate how Europe might look today. Join us on this speculative journey, and don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy content like this, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more thought-provoking history explorations. Let's start by looking at Europe as it stood before the European Union was conceived. After two devastating world wars, the continent was broken. Economies were failing, borders were in dispute, and mistrust among nations was at an all-time high. In 1951, leaders from 6 countries, Belgium, France, West Germany, Italy, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands, came together to form the European Coal and Steel Community. The idea was simple yet revolutionary. By pooling vital resources, they could rebuild Europe and ensure mutual dependency, making future wars between them almost impossible. This cooperation would pave the way for the European Economic Community and eventually the European Union we know today. But without this foundation, how would Europe have fared? In our alternate timeline, the EU never takes off. There's no European Coal and Steel Community, no Treaty of Rome, and no drive for unity. What happens next? The first major issue would be economic isolation. Without the EU's single market, trade among European nations would remain fragmented. Tariffs, protectionist policies, and competition would dominate the landscape. Smaller countries, without a larger collective to rely on, would struggle to keep up with global powers like the United States and the Soviet Union. Imagine France and Germany, 2 economic giants, competing fiercely rather than collaborating. Their rivalry would make it even harder for the continent to recover from the destruction of World War II. It's very possible that countries with weaker economies, such as Italy or Greece, would remain stuck in prolonged periods of economic stagnation. Another consequence: disorganized post-war rebuilding efforts. The Marshall Plan, which relied on European cooperation, might have faced significant obstacles. Without coordination among nations, aid distribution could have been inefficient, delaying recovery and modern infrastructure development. Economics aside, the absence of the EU could have had severe political repercussions. The rivalry between nations, dormant in our current timeline thanks to European unity, could have flared up again. Without a platform for cooperation, countries might have reverted to pre-WW II nationalist policies. Border disputes could resurface, bringing old wounds back to life. For example, tensions between France and Germany over the resource-rich regions like Alsace-Lorraine might have escalated into heated confrontations. The Cold War could also have taken a darker turn. With no unified Western European bloc to balance power, NATO might have struggled to contain the influence of the Soviet Union. Some countries might have aligned themselves more closely with the USSR out of fear or necessity, creating an even more polarized Europe. Would this fragmented political environment have led to another armed conflict? It's not out of the question. Without the mechanisms for diplomacy and cooperation that the EU provided, Europe might have faced a resurgence of regional wars before the century was over. Now let's delve deeper into the economic effects. One of the EU's most significant achievements is the euro, a common currency that simplifies trade and strengthens economic stability. Without the EU, this milestone is never reached. In a fragmented Europe, countries would retain their individual currencies, leading to chaotic exchange rates and economic uncertainty. Think of it this way. If you lived in 1980s Europe, you'd need to exchange money and pay fees just across borders for a weekend trip. For businesses, this volatility would have been a nightmare, discouraging cross-border trade and investment. Smaller economies, particularly in southern and eastern Europe, would bear the brunt of this instability. Nations like Portugal, Greece, or Hungary might have struggled to attract foreign investments and keep up with the industrial giants of the continent. Economic migration, a vital lifeline for many families today, would have been significantly hindered, isolating struggling regions even further. On a global scale, Europe might have lost its position as a key player in international trade. Instead of standing together as one of the largest and most formidable economies in the world, the continent would face stiff competition from rising powers like China and India. Now let's jump ahead to the present day. What would Europe look like if the EU had never existed? First, alliances would likely follow a more fractured pattern. We might see clusters of countries forming smaller trade deals or military partnerships rather than all 27 nations banding together. This could redraw Europe's political map entirely, with regional powers like Germany or the UK prior to Brexit, wielding disproportionate influence over their neighbours. Environmental progress would also see dramatic setbacks. Agreements like the Paris Climate Accord rely heavily on EU leadership. Without European unity, countries might have failed to prioritize sustainability, leaving today's environmental challenges even more daunting. Cultural and social cooperation, another hallmark of the EU, would also take a hit. Programs like Erasmus, which allow students to study across Europe, simply wouldn't exist. Younger generations would lose the opportunity to connect beyond their borders, further deepening a sense of national isolation. Borders themselves might be less stable, with disputed territories still unresolved, and old alliances shifting unpredictably over time. Perhaps the resurgence of regional conflicts, like those in the Balkans or between Turkey and Greece, would have erupted without the EU's mediation. Looking at the big picture, it's clear that the absence of the European Union would leave a very different Europe and world. The continent might still be grappling with deep-seated rivalries, stalled economies, and limited social integration. While individual nations might have prospered in isolated cases, the overall trajectory likely would have been one of disunity and struggle. But this is just one interpretation of what could have been. What do you think? Could Europe have found a different path to prosperity, or would the absence of the EU have led to greater instability and conflict? Speculative history is all about exploring possibilities. How do you imagine Europe's alternate timeline without the European Union? How would alliances, borders, and economies have evolved? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your ideas might inspire our next exploration. If you found this journey fascinating, please give the video a like and subscribe to our channel. By joining us, you'll gain access to more creative thought experiments and engaging takes on history that never was. Until next time, thank you for watching, and keep exploring the what-ifs that shape our understanding of the past and the present.